Okay, Luke. So you told us earlier that you had a very close friend that was a great modeler. You're the good form judge. So you're the dynamic duo, and you've gone into
Well, he's a good form judge as well.
okay, but you've gone into the game in a very good position because you're both very good at picking golf winners. Um, so why did you stop doing that?
Couldn't get on. Um, so in terms of each, so I think I was actually having a look back at the numbers a few days ago, and I think in 2014, 2015, we'd have got 7 figures on in shops and online accounts, and it just got to a stage where it was becoming so difficult to actually get the volumes on that you needed, that it just wasn't worth the hassle anymore. And you were finding, yeah, it was just impossible. It was far too much effort relative for the relative benefits of it.
Okay, so I'm assuming that you got yourself a wage in mind. So I mean, did you have executive wages in mind, or did you have the minimum wage in mind when you decided that something was not worth doing anymore?
Um, Never really looked at it as wages. So you look at it more in terms of, you can work out the expected value of every bet you place in, say, a shop. So, if over time, say we had a 5% edge on shop bets or each way betting, you place £1 million worth of bets, you might have an edge of, you might make 50,000 from that. But when there's two of you and, that doesn't pay the bills in terms of, your expected value. The reality is you have a few winners, you might make a lot more than that, particularly in a sport like golf. The edge might be 10%. But the reality is that, going around shops with a lot of cash around London, not safe, and it comes a time and a point where you go, enough's enough. Let's have a look at something else in terms of how best to sort of attack the problem. And we're doing a lot of in-running stuff anyway, so it was more a case of shifting, just not doing any pre-off stuff and doing, all in-running stuff.
Okay, now I've been lucky enough to interview a lot of guys like you, professional punters. They say, "Oh yeah, we got the value," and where you spot the value. So how do you work out your estimated value?
Very difficult, and I always think it's, with models, actually you can get a good idea as to what on each bet you place, you think you might have this percent edge. The reality is, on that basis, you're expecting your model to be perfect, and it's obviously not.
So would your model say this player's 12-1 and you can get 16? Is it simple as that?
Yeah. So it would generate prices, and it might be making someone at say 13, and you can get 16, and as long as the margin's big enough, you'd be happy to take that that bet. So and the same sort of implies in running is it's very difficult to get an accurate number as to what you think your edge is. But what you learn over time is you get a sort of a gut feel as to whether you have an edge or not. So ironically, we'll talk about NBA. If I go back to NBA, which we were talking about earlier, is what we were finding with NBA was we'd place bets and you'd have a position, and then when you're making adjustments at a time for timeouts and substitutions and foul trouble and all these other things, and then the team you were against would go on a 8-0 run, 10-0 run, and you're there going, oh, in a terrible position again. And it happened time and time again. And it gets to a stage where you think, maybe I'm actually not being unlucky. There's more to this in terms of sort of the nuances than you actually appreciate. And it's similar with golf in that in running is you get a feeling for the bets that you're placing, whether you're getting good value or not.
Okay, so another thing that you talked about in your 100 thing was you talk about courtsiding. Now we see it, most people saw the documentary with the guys doing it at the tennis, just beating the fastest finger to beat the bookies. So what were you doing?
Okay, so some subtle differences between golf and tennis. So when we were betting in running on golf, one of the problems you have with golf as a sport to bet on is that the picture is incomplete in terms of what's actually happening, right? So with tennis, you have the court, you can see exactly what's happening at all times. There's nothing happening in the stands or elsewhere. You see everything that's happening in front of you. The problem with golf is you have a situation where you have players on different holes, and you end up with a situation where you don't know at various times exactly what's happening. And if you're leaving large sums of money on site, is very liable for them to get swept. So in order to be able to actually place bets of sufficient size in running, is we decided we needed to have someone going to the events. So the other problem you had was on PGA Tour events, the TV delays maybe 45 seconds. And you also have the problem with shots are being queued up. So it's not like you're seeing that much, you're not seeing anything real time. Huge delays. Same was happening on the European Tour in terms of the delays. It may have been 6-7 seconds, but it's still big enough that you're not happy leaving prices up on site. And so ended up sending people to events, and it's expensive. People don't, it's not a case of, you only have to look at the golf markets to see that when something significant happens, is the liquidity drops through the floor, you get huge spreads, and there isn't some there isn't easy money just waiting to be picked off as would have been the case maybe 15 years ago. And so we decided that, in order to combat that, we'd send people to events. And as I say, it's a very costly business. By the time you've paid for flights and hotels and tickets, and you're paying for the software to be able to actually do the in-running stuff, that was 20% of profits, and then you've got premium charges and everything else. And so in many respects, it was almost a loss leader. And you then had other issues, like you have, I remember missing an event because person's flights got cancelled. We had another situation where there were other people doing similar things that, I remember in Switzerland, and the guy we had there got kicked out. And they were very brave to get him kicked out because he's 6'9" and enormous. And there was another tournament where my guy is saying to me, he goes, "This is strange. This guy keeps, he could see from previous events he'd been to other guys who were doing this, and he's like, this is strange, this guy's following me." I was like, and then every time this guy was near him, we were losing signal, and it ended up being sort of a cat and mouse where he was running away from this guy because I think this guy had almost jamming equipment on him, which was stopping our guy from actually sending any data. So you end up, there's a whole series of sort of complications to it. We had mistakes. If you make mistakes, they end up getting really quite costly. I'll give you an example. So we had a guy in Italy. It must have been 2017, and there's two guys. The final group are coming down 18. They're both in a fairway. So it was Matt Wallace and Tyrrell Hatton, and the two guys already in the clubhouse on -20. Hatton's on -20. Wallace was -19, I think it was, and they've hit the shots. And the information I'm getting is that Hatton is in the front bunker. I'm doing the maths in my head. If it's a two-way playoff, they'll both be 2 on Betfair. Three-way playoff, roughly there'll be 3. Four-way playoff, 4. And you obviously make adjustments from there. But I'm like, oh, Hatton's in the front bunker. I'm able to lay, if it's a 3-way playoff, because he makes par, he's not going to make a birdie out the bunker. It's hugely unlikely. And I was like, okay, so I'm happy. I'm laying Hatton all day long at 2.4. Next thing I know is I've got -15 ground position on Hatton. Next thing I know is Matt Wallace is taking the bunker shot, not Hatton, because got the balls wrongly, and so they're going, oh, and you're desperately trying to hedge. So got Hatton's liability down to about, I don't know, maybe 11k or something, and so Hatton's got this putt to win the tournament. It was about 18 feet, which is about 17% chance of making. So you're thinking, oh, okay, so you've still got 83%, going for us. And he duly rolls it in, and you're stuck with 11 grand loss, and wipes out a lot of the previous week's work. And it's there's nothing easy about events in terms of sending people to events. And what's actually good is since lockdown happened is IMG have they do their own version of it now through Bet365, and I know that I think William Hill are signing up for them soon as well. and they provide all the information that we used to do ourselves, and it's just a crazy situation where TV coverage and scoreboards and everything was so bad that we felt the only way we could actually trade the sport properly in running was by having people traipsing around the world.
Must have been a terrible job for those folks.
They would still complain.
You also say be clear who you're up against. Now, surely that's impossible when you're betting on the exchanges.
Yes and no. I think you need to understand how, say, syndicates work, and I think with things like football is you have to realise that the pricing is a lot softer early in the week, and as time goes on, as the syndicates get more involved, it ends up getting to a true price, just before kickoff. And if you're playing earlier in the week, you have a much better chance than you do if you're placing bets a minute before kickoff. And so you don't know per se that you're up against syndicates, but you know that all the information that the syndicates have and all the data, all the models that they have, that's all reflected in the current price. So whilst you don't know you're betting against syndicates, you're betting against information that they've put into the market. Okay,
now you've mentioned syndicates on several occasions. I mean, sounds a bit murky. I mean, how many syndicates are out there?
I mean, it depends on different sports. So on golf, you had Mustard Bet, who were a bookmaker, but they originally grew from being a golf syndicate, and then they went into I think one of the problems that a lot of syndicates actually have is getting the bets on that they need. So a lot of them have taken the opportunity to become almost bookmakers themselves, because one way for them to get more money on is by taking bets from the general public. I know people who work at syndicates. I don't want to be betting against syndicates. That's all I can say. Is you have to pick and choose who you try and win money off. That's not to say that they're unbeatable and they have their own weaknesses, but as a general rule, you want to avoid them.
Right. Okay. There's something else you mentioned, quick wins. It's quite interesting to me because, I follow tipsters. Do you think that people who follow tipsters actually want to know how that selection is picked, or do they just want to win?
Well, I think, as a society, people are obsessed with getting something for nothing or very cheaply. And if you have a tipster who's able to make you money, then great. But one of the problems I have with it is, if a tipster was so great, they would, there's no getting away, they would be doing it themselves. They wouldn't be, they're not going to be selling the information if it's that good. And what you end up with is, they may have an edge early on, but the reality is, all that's happened is you've been told to back this horse, this horse, this horse, and then come the end of it, you don't actually have anything to show for it apart from the fact that you've probably lost money. You've not actually learned anything on the journey. And there's one thing I'm trying to get across to people is that you may make some money, you may lose some money, but you're not improving your skill set and actually understanding of the industry, so that at some stage you might be able to go and do that yourself.
Okay, now you say that football and NFL are hard to beat. So if a sport's hard to beat, should you be laying it?
No. So in terms of being hard to beat is come off time. I think they're the most accurate sports. There's a very simple sort of correlation between how accurate a sport is and the amount of money that has been put into that sport in terms of resource development, modelling. So, and it sort of comes back to how much money is available for people to win. So the syndicates will go, right, football, we can get the most money on football, so we're going to spend the most money actually trying to beat football. And so what you end up with is that because so much money is spent on trying to model football and make football as accurate as possible, because the winnings are the greatest, that actually come off time, they are probably the most efficient sports in terms of their pricing. And the same with NFL in America. And you can't benefit from laying those prices per se. They're just very accurate in terms of where they end up settling